Hello, everyone. Lovely to see you all again. Glad that you've joined us. And I've got the remarkable Simon Pollard here today, somebody that I've heard of a lot. We haven't actually met before, I don't think, Simon, but you've been referred to me quite often over the last 5 or 6 years, and our paths have never crossed. So I'm intrigued to find out more about you. And so, welcome. How's your day going today? We've got a hot day here.
We've got a hot day. It started a little earlier than I had expected, but I tend to take that as a bonus. So by then it's kind of like it's 5:45, and although I possibly could drift off, my brain's going. So
Mm.
I got up, and I'm actually in the process of writing book number 4 at the moment, and it's becoming a bit of a monster, which is rather exciting. So descended down to the office, sat here in this very spot, and started writing. Um, and from there, I've kind of like got up and done some running around, and now I have the indomitable pleasure to find myself sat here. So very
Excellent.
well.
Oh, well done. I'm looking forward to finding out more about your writing then. One of the reasons I've invited you is because I'm aware that you are becoming more prolific as a writer. And let's start by giving a bit of background. I mean, I know you from your radio and your business work. Tell us a little bit about your journey to get where you are here today with your books.
Uh, it's been about a 40-year apprenticeship, I think it's fair to say. Um, I mean, as you were saying earlier, I am a qualified teacher. Amongst other things, I've also run various different businesses. Um, I always think I don't earn, and I've earned at least 3 times now this morning. It's disgraceful. But I've been a teacher. I've run several businesses, uh, landscaping businesses, garden design businesses, and I'm currently running, or at least leading, a CIC called Slow the Mind, which was set up to provide people with the opportunity to make
Mm.
better, more informed decisions than I had the opportunity to do when I was a teenager. And I guess the largest part of that apprenticeship, as I probably spent best part of 35, 40 years managing anxiety with alcohol, because I didn't know that I was managing anxiety, quite chronic anxiety on occasions.
Right.
Because when I was a teenager, we didn't talk about mental health. We didn't talk about anxiety or depression. And suicide was kind of like, yeah, it was something you committed,
Mm.
which is a terrible phrase. And as a teenager, you discover alcohol and you discover other drugs, and they numb the pain and you start to function. And as we all know, with anything, you build up a tolerance. And it's very easy to become a functioning alcoholic. You know, alcohol's not that expensive in the supermarket, and you can drink several pints or whatever of a night time, wake up clear as a bell, because when you're drinking regularly, hangovers don't exist. Go to work, do your stuff, and do it all again. And I did that for a long, long time.
Mm. Mm.
Unfortunately, when you then do your binging, it gets a bit out of control. So I guess having made a lot of considerably better choices, it made an awful lot of sense to try and help other people
Mm.
to give themselves the opportunity to make better choices. Because for about 35, 40 years, my life is a bit of a blur. I don't remember much of it because, to be fair, I was, polite word, not very sober.
Mm. Mm. There's a common
And
story, isn't it? Because I think back in the day, it was very easy to be absorbed into alcohol as a social event, and not so much chosen by the youngsters these days. I suppose the 70s saw more drugs come into the scene, but alcohol has always been a very socially acceptable form of self-medication, hasn't it? And like you say, nobody spoke about mental health, at the least of all men's mental health. And women were given diagnosis of being hysterical and other forms of problems that they were allocated, but men were generally ignored. So it's very brave of you to come across and talk about that as a past event. But what are you doing now then? What's this book about, and what work are you doing to help support people?
the book I'm working on at the moment, which is probably going to be called The Clock and the Woodcutter, is scoot back a couple of steps.
Hmm.
I walked the Pennine Way last September. I walked it in the first instance because I wanted to. It's one of those ever since I knew it existed, I wanted to walk it. It's 268 miles long, spanning from Edale, just east of Manchester, up into the Scottish borders.
Yeah. Mm.
And it's 268 miles long, so you can't exactly slot it into a weekend. And I span it out over a month last September. And by coincidence, last September was Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, and the 10th was Suicide Prevention Awareness Day. So we had a little bit of TV and a little bit of radio footage, which we did. But as an author, there was always going to be a book about the Pennine Way. When I finished it, I just wasn't sure how I was going to go about it, because there's an awful lot of travelogues out there.
Mm.
And there's a fair number about the Pennine Way. Yeah, I've only got to think of Michael Palin, for example, who's written a lot of books about a lot of wandering. So I was always looking for a way to make the story a little bit different. And then towards the end of November, I got dragged along by my wife to a fundraising event for the Harmony Therapy Trust. It was an evening of mediumship, spiritual contact, the ancestors, and all the rest of it. And as a fairly spiritual person, I tend to think most of it is hokum, for want of a better phrase. Desperate people being led by questions to say this and that, and I don't have a lot of time for it, hence dragged along. And the lady who actually ran it, I know very well, and she knows exactly what I think. She normally avoids me like the plague on that subject. But on that night, she just hooked straight into me. First person, straight in, bang. I'm like, okay, then, here we go. And she's talking about this character, and it's not your usual stuff. She's sort of saying, that they're struggling to breathe. The air's bad. And she goes into various description of whatever else, but not to worry, because, the person's very calm and they're okay and all the rest of it. And then it went off into the usual stuff. And it wasn't until a week or two later, I suddenly thought, wonder if she's talking about my grandfather. I never met my grandfather on the paternal side. And all I knew is that he'd completed suicide back in 1952. But it was never, my father didn't speak about him. My grandmother never spoke about him. That I really remember, because we're talking like 40 odd years ago, that I was around for both those people. But I knew that he'd survived 4 years of World War One. And I wasn't entirely sure how he completed suicide, but it turns out he basically took a pipe, attached a hose pipe to a gas pipe, and climbed in a cupboard and shut the door.
Okay.
Now, it's quite possible that I thought it was quite possible she was talking about him. And then I was reading about the science of epigenetics, and epigenetics is the story of trauma passed through the generations. And then I looked at some of the most important parts of his life and some of the important parts of my life, and there was a correlation. And I suddenly thought, what if the trauma that I'm managed well these days for the most part, wasn't my trauma, it was his trauma? Because normally when you research people who are struggling, there's something in and around childhood that set the chain of events into motion. Now, we weren't a very tactile family, but there's nothing we can find in my childhood that would suggest that there was anything that could have fed into it or led into it. Now, I don't know. I didn't meet the man. We've got a lot of bones to put on a skeleton, but not a lot of flesh. But I thought, you know what? If we take this as a story, and we started in 1897 when he was born, and we look at his life and what happened and may well have affected the choices that he made, and then string those through with my story of the Pennine Way, where there's an awful lot of philosophizing, an awful lot of thinking going on, and link a lot of that back to my childhood, We've now got a story that, say, starts in 1897, potentially finishes anywhere around now that I'd like to choose. And we've got two stories that I can tell in parallel and
Mm.
crisscross back from one to the other. And all of a sudden, I think I've got something that's very, very much more exciting than just a trip along the Pennine Way.
Mm.
And so I've literally just finished writing the first draft, which I'm redrafting of the Pennine Way section, before I take a short break and then delve into some real, I mean, I've got a lot of research done, but start actually combining it, putting it together, getting a
Mm.
timeline together and fleshing it through. I've got some meetings set up with some very knowledgeable people who will hopefully help me out before we sort of start getting into phase two of the writing. Um, and that, for a lot of ways, is taking up, apart from paying the bills and paying the mortgage, it's taking up the bulk of my time at the moment.
Mm.
It's a very simple existence at the moment, and I love it.
That sounds like an exciting book in itself because it would appeal. I think you've got the healing nature of nature as well, coupled with the intellectual kind of analysis as well that might go on. So, who's this book aimed at then, and what sort of person are you hoping to influence or support?
You know, I'm writing this for me. In the first instance, I'm writing it for me.
Mm.
And I haven't given any thought to who might read it, to be fair. I suppose put on the spot, I would hope some people will read it just because they think it's a rollicking good read. Uh,
Mm.
it could be dramatized and put on the TV, and that would be fantastic. I'd hope that some people will read it because they just want to know a little bit about, as we say, that the healing journey that goes on. Some people may read it because a story of completion of suicide is always a story in itself. I know that
Mm.
on the Pennine Way, everybody's got a story of suicide. There are going to be some people that may read it just because they want to know about the Pennine Way.
Mm. Mm.
But I'm
I
making
think
it up. The bottom line is I'm writing it because I want to. I think it's a fascinating story. And I'm hoping that other people, when we get it out there, will share that enthusiasm as to who
mm.
they are. No,
Mm.
uh, at
I
all.
think there's an authenticity about that, isn't there? And that's what makes it helpful to other people, is it's not a fantasy or even perhaps an intellectual exercise. There's a lot of your own authentic searching in there, and I think a lot of people don't always get to the answers as to why they feel anxious. What is the problem? They don't think to look back to genetic kind of historical memory that's passed down through. So it's a valuable way of approaching the whole process of what anxiety is and how you can live with it, manage it, perhaps overcome it. Yeah, I do understand about suicide. I've had several suicides in my history. It's interesting you bring up the spiritual aspect. So when you say you're a spiritual person, in what way are you a spiritual person?
In the first place, I have to just say that the mediumship, the lady concerned, has told me stuff that there is no way she could have known unless she's done the same research I have. So maybe there's more into that than I sometimes want to let on. And I very firmly believe that whatever it is, that spark that makes us be, to remember to breathe, to make our heart beat, to actually be alive, has to come from somewhere, and it has to go somewhere. You know, we're taught at school energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Okay, transform like a candle. You know, the
Yeah.
flame of the candle is there and then it's not there, but the energy doesn't go anywhere. So somewhere in that embryo creation, a spirit, a soul, whatever you want to call it, has to come from somewhere. It cannot just cease to exist and then blossom again. So it can surely never completely go away. So that was one of the first realizations. And when you think about that and you research it, there's a number of Hindu stories that talk not about the journey from birth to death, the journey between death and birth. And when I wrote The View Over the Wall, book number 2, that one,
Oh, yes.
did a lot of research about within religious and spiritual practices around the world, Native American spiritualism, Buddhism. And because for me, there was a basic core of all of them. And it was just looking, and I plotted this journey through all of these different religions, thoughts, practices, because ultimately we are a part of this world. We are a part of nature. We are ultimately affected, whether we wish to be or not, by the world around us. You know, it's part of our DNA, it's part of our heritage. And for most of our history, we lived our lives according to that natural cycle, to the wheel of the year. You know, today is the 3rd of May, and 2 days ago was Beltane. You know, the celebration of fire, the celebration of the world properly waking up for the new year to really start kicking in, for growth to start picking up. And that follows through to Samhain, the end of October, what we nowadays call Halloween. That's where the world would go. And you would plan through that summer to grow and have a harvest that you would then store so that you were okay for the winter months. When you spend time thinking and you spend time planning. For me, spirituality is about understanding where you are, to being a part of the world, to listening to what the world has to say to you, to the communications that are out there. There's a wonderful Native American proverb that basically says the tree people never stop talking, the finned people never stop talking, the winged people never stop talking, the four-legged people never stop talking. It's just that the two legs stop listening. Now that is incredibly powerful.
So is this something that you came to after your sobriety, or is this something that grew out of your problems with anxiety in the early days when you were drinking, perhaps? Or is this something afterwards?
I think I always knew it when I was a child. If things weren't the way I thought they should be, or the way I wanted them to be, I would take off into the countryside. You know, it's back in the days where your parents would give you a packed lunch at 9 o'clock in the morning, put you on your push bike and tell you not to come back till 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
And the countryside was always the place where there was peace, where there was calm. And I would go and stay there until such time as either I was starving hungry or I knew I'd get into trouble. And I'd go home. And I knew it. And I think most children know it. I think, as I say, it's innate, it's part of a heritage. But I remember working with the RSPB down at Dungeness as a field teacher. And you get the small groups that would come in. And the teachers would say, right, that one's a pain. That one can be difficult. Watch that one. And those are all those prescribed troublemakers, or those who had who had special educational needs. And yet outdoors, those were the kids that engaged way better than the so-called academics.
Yeah.
So I think it is there. I think it's always part of us. I lost it I lost it in some ways when I dissolved into alcohol. Because that just stops motion. There's an awful lot about, again, if you go back on that ancestral trail, we were nomadic, we were moving, we followed the food, or we followed the season, or we followed for whatever reason. It's only recent mankind's history we've put ourselves in these big square boxes and become sedentary, and that's changed the world in the way that we think. But I think the other thing that's part of that, you know, I mean, we sort of say, have I always known, or have I found it now? It's not until you stop and you actually start to think that you realize in all things, you have a choice. You know, just take a moment. In everything that happens, you have a choice. You know, you can't control everything that happens to you, but you can always control how you respond to it. making sure that you don't ever react, because that gives the power away. But if you respond, you keep the power. And
Mm.
if you then choose the way that you react, you then have the option to actually start saying, all this external stuff, not my fault, nothing I can do about it.
Mm.
But
So
I can do something about the
I know,
internal.
yeah, I just wanted to bring up the aspect of helping other people because I know you're doing these other groups, aren't you? Do you take people out? Is that part of your walking therapy and the things that you organise for people? Uh,
It's been for a number of reasons. One, and to be fair, it's a weird one. Those people that came out on all of our events and activities, almost to a person, said, I mean, the reviews and the testimonials we've got just blow your mind.
mm,
It's really, really simple stuff just to get people to come outside and engage with the world that they're in. But we've always struggled, and whether that's down to lockdown or anything else, to get enough people to come out to actually make it work properly. So I've taken a step back at the moment. We put together Slow the Mind, and we had some drop-in centres which were working. Again, the fellow who was running them for us had to take a step back, so we're just reevaluating that.
mhm,
And I've got a kind of talking woods group that we're just putting together gently at the moment, which is for
mhm,
people that have read something that they want to share or that want to write bits and pieces. And we talk about whatever it is that comes to the fore. I mean, last time we had a lady, she'd had a poem published,
mm,
and it was about the difference between what's going on inside and what people see on the outside.
mm,
And we're looking to move forwards with that.
mm,
Slow the Mind is we're looking to collaborate very, very closely with another charity, and we're in discussions about that at the moment so we can provide a much more holistic service. But it's all of that, as we said earlier, it's kind of taken a bit of a backseat because I'm saying needed to devote my time to writing this book.
mm, mm,
And to be fair, my wife sat me down earlier this year. When I came back from the Penang Way, I said, I'm not going to be doing stuff at the pace I was doing it before, ever again.
mm.
And then by the time
Good.
we got to Christmas, all of a sudden I realised I hadn't had a day off in 2 months. Took a couple of weeks just to sort of say, do you know what is the important thing here? What do I actually want to do?
Yeah.
And I just backed off everything, social
Mm,
media, the whole lot,
mm,
and put a lot of stuff dormant, purely and simply so that right now, so I've got this little group I'm just creating, and I can focus on writing the book. And
mm,
we're about 90,000 words at the moment. I'm barely halfway through it. As I say, it's a
mm.
bit of a monster.
And how do you publish your books? Do you self-publish or do you go through a publisher?
It's it's a bit of a balance. The first book, the 3 Year Pond, went through a kind of vanity house publishing platform. The View Over the Wall, that one, and the Sheeple Principle, that one currently are on Amazon. So because it's dead cheap and it's dead easy, and there's no sort of like kerflaff. But everybody that I've spoken to at the moment about the new one are saying you have got to have an agent. You have absolutely got to have an agent. This book needs to be get out there. If you can put it across well, I think I can do that. Then you'll find them. You're going to find somebody at some point who will snap it up. But the old-fashioned publishing route, because of social media, because of Amazon and various other places, doesn't really exist anymore. There's a lot of vanity. So I'm hoping that the next one will get properly published through an agent. But at the moment, you either get them from me or you get them from Amazon.
Okay, yeah, so that's good to know because I think people will be interested in finding out about more about your book. So I will put the information in on the comments and in the description of this interview. But because I think the books are a segue, aren't they, into who you are and what you're doing and the next book to come. And so I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your personality then. So You're very laid back today, but I have seen you speaking, and I do promote Simon as a speaker. You've had a radio show, haven't you? And you do public speaking and promote the work that you do. And would it be fair to say that you're quite a colourful character?
An impassioned speech is, or an impassioned presentation is one of the most powerful tools we have out there. And the responsibility then, I think, is to actually use that positively. My gift to the world, hopefully, is words. You know, spoken words is in presentation, written words is in books and the blogs that I've written. And very much so, I mean, as to me, a person, colourful, my basic premise now these days is my number one responsibility to me is to be happy.
Yes.
Is to be at peace on the inside.
Do you
And
think this comes with age, Simon? Your inner spirit wants to be stiller. Would you agree with that?
I think my inner spirit does. However, I don't think when I was a teenager, I realised I could actually take responsibility for all of that.
Mm.
I don't know, even five to 10 years ago, if somebody told it to me, I probably wouldn't have taken it on board. If you tell anyone who's drinking and thinks alcohol is the solution to all their problems, that actually if it's the cause of their problems, they're not going to believe you. I wouldn't have heard it.
No, they don't.
No, it's so, yeah, I mean, age is definitely a part of it, but whether it's that age that gives you that receptiveness to take it on board, and I would have liked to think somebody would have sat me down when I was a younger man and said, just think about this. Might take you 6 months, might take you a year, but that's got to be more preferable to 30 years.
The role modeling aspects of your kick, etc., that you're doing, it's setting examples and avenues for people to find that support, isn't it?
It is. I think one of the things that you don't realize till you're older that I think would be a great help is everybody, and it's probably at the nub of conscious anxiety, is you are incredibly worried about what you perceive other people think of you for what you do,
Mm.
wear, say, behave. And the earlier that you can have the realization that people don't, because the only thing they're actually worried about is themselves, for
Yeah.
me, that was a massive realization. I remember watching Poldark first time round with Angard Rees and Robin Ellis. It
Mm.
was on TV in the 70s. And I absolutely loved it. And I remember looking at what people were wearing and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. But we're going into my teenage years. It's the new wave of British heavy metal, and I'm desperate to be liked by my peer group. And so I very quickly developed a shade of black for everything. You know, and as I went through, and for probably most of my adult life, I had a shade of black for everything. And then when you start coming out of that life, that state of mind, and you realize that there are things you have got to change and some things that you just want to change. And when you realize, as I said, nobody really cares about what you're doing because they're too worried about themselves, that gives you carte blanche to say, do you know what? What do I actually want to wear? What do I want to do? What do I want to be seen as? And for me, I started wearing colour in the first instance. You know, the black went. I still do wear a bit of black these days, but
Mm-hmm.
when it's appropriate or needed, rather than because I just wanted to vanish into that black thing. And then I started wearing the frock coats and the waistcoats, and but you'll see a lot of the social media and a lot of what I'm doing, and yeah, there's an element of the Regency style in there because I really like it. But it has to be, for me, it has to be a mishmash. I'm not going to go out like a Georgian, you know, with the socks
No,
and
no.
the 3-point hat and all the rest of it. That's going too far. That's quite handy,
But it's
especially
that
for
authenticity again, isn't it? You're finding your authentic self and just
yeah,
living your life
yeah,
and being yourself.
absolutely.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
it's one of those. It's a little scary, but again, that's something else. That conscious anxiety thing is very much rooted in that fear. And for me now, but if it
No,
scares me, that's my cue to step forward and do it.
I understand that. Yeah. So that's amazing then. So basically, you've taken us on a journey through your life. You've given us some insight into what moves you and how you found yourself now and what you're doing. And I look forward to seeing the next book. And if anybody wants to contact Simon, can they email you? Is there a website or anything that they can contact you on, Simon, if they want to talk to you about anything?
The easiest way to get in touch, if you just go to the website, simonpollard.uk, all of the contact details are on there. You can buy books through there, as well as the view of the wall, which I showed you. You can get the Sheeple Principle as well.
That looks good.
And the 3-year pond is available there.
Okay.
If you ask me very nicely, I might give you all 3 at a reduced price.
Sounds great.
There, but yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
so everything will be on the descriptor, and I'll make a comment as well. So I'd just like to say thank you then, Simon, for such an interesting insight into what you're working on, why you're doing it. I look forward to the Pennine Way, and I think we all should put our boots on now and go out for a walk and start breathing and thinking about some of the things you said.
Absolutely. No, it's just
Thank you.
giving yourself space.
Yeah. So thank